So let's examine within the inverted dark theory, so within the awareness of the things that we've been listing, and also I've added to the original statement on inverted dark theory a list of four different, I guess maybe it's three plus the Bolton one as like sort of the negative reject, sort of the total rejection of the inverted moment. Um, But okay, this one is an attempt to superimpose Kafkaian thinking according to, uh, let's say, partially according to Agamben, partially according to various other interpretations. And we'll say here, Kafka is the moment where der Prozess, or um, procès in French, the process. So it's sort of important to the article we're going to look at. We're going to look at this through that process and trial in some of the in French and German um, uh, can be intertranslatable, or near cognates. Words that sound like process, let's say, but not just sound, but are actually related and also in their text, as it were, to speak in a Nietzschean way, not just in what we write on them while we're mixing them into this stew. What I'm going to look at chiefly is, in order to cast our horoscope, is the article is a kind of thesis I'm writing onto the this article by Samuel Moyn and a collaborator, um, Ryan Dorf something. Sorry, I can't think of the Dorfer or something like that. I don't know. But in any case, an article written with a Harvard professor and a Yale professor of law. Let's superimpose that over this current inverted moment, where Zizek's saying there has to be an alpha bung in Europe with Mertz and the red line dilemma, as Habermas calls it. I noticed that there's an article of 40,000, is it 40,000? Something like that, German women signing up for the army, or to do some initial service with the army, not to enlist, but to, to enlist, but in the idea that they're now want everyone to get some time in the army. Since this month they've started to push that. I'm not sure, it will probably go, there'll be tranches or whatever, and then people will see how Germany is a consensus country. So it's like once a crucial part of the society takes on this Mertz war footing, I think it will naturally the dynamo will start to spin as though on its own, right? So let's see here in, by the way, if you listen to this and then you say, oh, but it's just rambling, but remember, everything I'm mentioning is something floating in the stew that we could sort of superimpose and build structures of metonymic crystals with. It's like I mentioned this thing about the substantive due process. We haven't quite got there yet. And what we're saying, I'm mentioning that we're superimposing this over these other presentations on inverted dark theory centering around the NSS, and so on. At the same time, hopefully we're not just saying everything we could possibly say, but we want to expunge some elements, proscribe some elements, and sort of do some exegesis of the text. So what is the text? So let's look at the text as the law, the American law, as seen through this sort of institutionally insider presentation. So remember, in this SCOTUS in America, all the justices come. I guess it's the one institution, Article 3, which is supposed to be one of the major parts of the separations of power in the American system, the Montesquieu system, French modification on the academic or Platonic system, or some kind of post-Platonic system that came out of Plato's Academy. What they're saying as the institutional insiders who represent two of the four schools out of which all the Supreme Court justices are derived. The others being Columbia and let's see, Harvard, Yale, Columbia, and is there not one more? I'm not sure right now at the moment, but let's look at this article from a point that they mention in the beginning, which is the distinction. They make this sort of analogy, which is very unclear and very broad. So I'm just going to, as it were, write the text here and try to throw it over the investigation we're making. And what they say is, just as the superintendents of God over the legal system stopped being believed in. I'm sort of paraphrasing a little bit. Right now we're witnessing the situation where the notion of legitimacy as an institutional standard of trust and understood as, well, let's just say for now, the notion of legitimacy is now being cast into this situation where either it's not really believed in or it just doesn't seem appropriate any longer to do American life through this lens. So once upon a time, they're saying there was divine superintendence, and it's very hard to know exactly what they're referring. Are they referring to the 60s as the moment when this started to break down? Are they referring to the 1830s as the moment when the Protestant religion ceased to have as direct a sway over the universities and over... Originally, the American universities were mostly founded... The main American universities were mostly founded to create pastors or to create some kind of... hierophants, if you like, to speak sort of extra temporally. I don't know. Hierophant can be thrown down in ancient Egypt as much as on our own time, and then we wonder if it's accurate or not, and then looking at the details, maybe they don't even belong in the same genus, but then again, maybe it casts some light. It seems to apply better to the École Normale Supérieure than it does to the American universities. But in any case, because the École Normale Supérieure, you have much more direct creation of the disciples by the older professors. But here it happens also. But I think there's less insistence that one really learn the way of thinking. There's more pseudo-openness, or maybe like real openness in the sense that you're left to your own devices, so stupid openness. So let's look at the question of the valence of Trump in a Kafkaean light. Joseph K. as Trump. So let's see, here we have the first president to enter a totally new legal situation. So The trial is usually so we could put forward the Justice K's the trial as the first liberal moment of law. So that means, in other words, Joseph K. He says, I wake up, I'm not guilty of anything, unschuld, and totally unschuld, no guilt. But nonetheless, somehow, maybe somebody has been telling some lies about me. Something's wrong. Why am I under investigation? So this is this is explication of what it is to be a liberal individual, according to Kafka's view. And then you're sort of isolated. You're individualized. You have your own particular guilt. All of a sudden, you're not part of the, and you don't understand why it's all happening. And you have sort of supposedly you're participating in your process or trial. Trial can mean also proof by your whole life. I speak of proving something. It can mean proving out. The proof is in the pudding. So the trial's begun, and basically Agamben reads Kafka here to say it's not that there's, as the Americans say, positive law, Kelsen, or whoever, or the Hartfuller debate, or who is it that talks like this about the well, I mean, this is generally taken to be the case that there's a I mean, Scalia, I think that the whole project of Scalia is based on accepting that there's not divine superintendents, but instead there's the law as made by the Congress, and then all the faith is supposed to go in the fact that the Congress is supposed to be representative bodies who are creating laws according to what was wanted by the voter, and then voting is supposed to be, well, let's leave that aside. It's supposed to be a defense on our freedoms, but this then implies that freedom means the mob getting somehow what it wants, the mob of people, which sort of makes no sense, because if you could have one ruler, so say the valence of the ruler, well, let's give us the sense of how this is at stake. So right now there's supposed to be a tariff case that comes out in January, and if it's decided on Trump's side, this will be as though to say Trump has full so-called emergency powers. Then all the analysis we see in Agamben, Homo Sacer, and all this stuff will come more clear in the usage, because then we'll have constantly the state of exception, right? The thing analyzed by Hobbes and by Schmidt. It doesn't really matter that much, I would say, that some of our founders didn't like, American founders, didn't like Hobbes because they read him, and so they could have been moved by him, even though, like in the case of Madison, I think they denounced him. That happens all the time. But, okay, we're throwing in a lot of ingredients, hoping they smooth the way, but maybe they won't. Let's try to do an enumeration. There's law understood as the judges are trying to actually judge, and then therefore it's sort of like a math problem. It's assumed that the basic laws of, let's say arithmetic are there, but that people could make mistakes when they're actually figuring. You have a row of figures, 103, 107, 92, 3, 5, 6, 7. The figures are there, and the operation of addition is clear, but you could make some errors in the actual doing of it. So then you say, give us time and will work the law pure through the law of precedence. But this assumes that there's a sort of judgment that's analogous to the fact that one understands what addition is, or that is, one is able to carry out the operation of addition correctly. So in the same way, one is able to carry out the operation of divining the law out of case histories correctly, something like that. That no longer existing, then the positive law theory comes in, and back behind the positive law theory we get the notion that the people, through their one most powerful right, the vote, which are the right that sustains all of their powers, are actually creating these lawmakers, and that it supposedly matters that they sustain and create the voter sustains and creates the lawmaker in the Article 1. It must be that there's spilling over the so-called text, the Constitution, and the order as it actually exists. These markings. So you got the problem of the ghosted markings and the sort of Derridean sense. You got all these markings written over the Constitution, little notes and so on, until you eventually you're just reading it that way, as by the way you've been acculturated. So yeah, we have those are two regimes, and then we get a regime that says, according to this article, this law school article, we get this regime that says what really matters is the legitimacy of this so-called legitimacy, understood as some almost Deweyan, in its simplicity, measure between the substance of the legal decisions and the perception by the population, so that the substance of the legal decision could be perfect, but it matters somehow that the perception of the population doesn't like it's viewed to be bad by the population. I mean, an example maybe is Richard Rorty's example, although I think it's false for Kant. I mean, it's not accurate for Kant, but I think I understand what he means. What he means is, in the current environment, the way Kant is interpreted by the academy is to be sort of this wild perfectionist. So then it would be like, it would almost be Kant would insist with respect to abortion that there could be no abortions, according to this way of thinking, because everything is carried to the ideal type. That's not the way Kant actually thought, but just maybe that's the way it kind of is in the political view, that everything can be pushed to the extremes. That's what happens in liberalism. And then the other extreme is Fast Times at Ridgemont High, or whatever, California morals. And then you see it's kind of better to have California morals because it's more enjoyable. And then so you get this mix between this super otherworldly, there must be simply no exceptions, and the sort of hedonic version. And then your law can be built around that. So they're saying, since like just as recently as the 90s, with some decisions by Kennedy and so on, about this notion of legitimacy. Legitimacy has been increasingly pushed because the courts are so on a nothing ground. Nobody knows what writing to put beside the text. And there's no true hermeneut who can guide us here. But then in this, so they're saying, yeah, we had this little hiccup of the legitimacy phase, but they're saying, since that doesn't exist, why don't we stop pretending it exists and go on to the next phase? I think this moment, so actually this article just came out, so I think this moment sort of corresponds to the NSS moment and to the popping up of sort of Jacobitism, if you like, and this sort of strange, I mean, you have to assume a Jacobite wasn't really like, I mean, I know there was such a thing as the Concert of Vienna and all that, and there was in some way a restoration, but you have to assume in some way the latter Napoleons weren't really Napoleon, just like but even more so in the time of Guizot, when there was a total rationalist rise of inductive reasoning, and history hadn't yet been dissolved and thrown away, as in Marxism. It hadn't yet become a mechanical notion of let's try to find out what the mechanical reasons, industrial revolution or whatever, are for the current development or for the current state of Montana or whatever. But in Guizot, you still see sort of the last gasp of history as it was always understood since the time of Plutarch, at least, as something connected to the a sort of attempt to act out the suke of, or the suke of impressive figures, and to put oneself in the right model. So we have there's sort of four regimes there, I think. One, law is resting in the mind of God, and it can be discovered, just as the triangle in Thomas, where, by the way, I should say, one of the elements here is, for Thomas, yes, we have the strength of faith, as the immediate prostration, or the even lying flat stomach down on the ground, rather than what we have in Descartes, the debate between Descartes and Hobbes, which is a sheerly mathematical argument, because they say it's more like, if you're undisturbed, if your mind is functioning properly, what conclusion are we going to come to here? It doesn't involve the actual world or faith or reality in a certain sense. It only involves, that's a sort of question of the existentialist moment in a certain sense, looking at problems like that. But in any case, there's one regime like that. Then there's a second regime of law, which, is more relies on the summa ratio, or some kind of building up through the case law, through the judge-made law. Americans aren't allowed to say judge-made law for some reason. You're supposed to say the law precedents, but then that was quietly stamped out by Scalia. It's the precedents during Scalia's reign, let's call it, were squashed out of the statutory law. They couldn't be successfully removed from SCOTUS. That was discovered in some way by practice, although it was known already by theory. So Scalia and his supposed ideological enemy, Elena Kagan, both took that tack, and many others took the tack, and then at length, the judge-made law, the law of precedents, was scrubbed out. Sort of the American, it was lost all its power because the decisions of the lower courts became simply decisions of the lower court, so that there was an utter subordination of the courts that deal with the statutory law to the courts that deal with the constitutional law. But it was not. It was somehow intensified by the fact of the total contempt for the judge-made law, for the law of precedence in the lower courts, which wasn't historically the case. Although it had crept up, you had people like Potter Stewart, who had was Potter Stewart a Supreme Court justice? Well, in any case, Learned Hand was not a Supreme Court justice. You had people that were not Supreme Court justices that had quite a bit of power in the past. I guess Potter Stewart was a Supreme Court justice, but Learned Hand definitely wasn't. I was thinking of that. I know it when I see a decision, which somehow is part of this moment in the process, if you like. And then you have these two current moments, and this this moment of the legitimacy and then the post-legitimacy. Maybe all four of these things aren't quite on the same level of analysis, but somehow it's nice to look at them just in this ordering. It's kind of a temporal ordering into the breakdown. And then if they break down, so let's look at that just concretely in news talk, if you like. So the news talk is the tariff law must be put down on the basis of the emergency issue, and Trump's administration must be understood as pursuing the current emergency, which is ongoing in the United States, as is often and perpetually given voice in the media. There's always talk of the emergency of the various issues of immigration, of other issues. And then what they're saying is, this tariff law must be passed for the sake of the emergency powers, and there also must be allowed to Trump to increase ICE by 40,000 or whatever, and to, in addition, mobilize the military within the country when necessary. So there's a move towards what I guess I would call it a release of the even the post-legitimacy court. So I mean, I guess from within the post-legitimacy framework, it sort of looks like, then what they're arguing a lot in the article is like, then you can, well, one, they say Trump won like 20 cases or something in a row, but I think the point is, then it's sort of like you can do whatever you can get away with. It doesn't matter what the public thinks. You could do whatever you get away with. So it's sort of like a totalitarian wartime situation. And then they're presenting it as though, Schuld were involved, or as though law were involved. Whereas in the Kafkian Joseph Carr or Trump situation, you have a figure. So I mean, Trump's on the other side. Joseph K. was on the side of worrying about what was happening through the dark forces, through the dark machinations of whatever that is. Whereas Trump is like sort of like the sovereign, sort of like the Hobbesian sovereign. But in the case of the Hobbesian sovereign, it's written into the Constitution, more or less, that this is the sovereign must have, the sovereign must be the current sovereign and not some dead laws on the books. The sovereign is the current sovereign, the living sovereign. Whether or not this living sovereign is also an exegete is very important. So I think we should. Trump is being characterized as drunken by his chief of staff. Has a drunkard's personality. Of course, he's a teetotaler, but is drunken in that the Hercules type is always sort of a drunk. And thus the squishiness behind, but the boldness and the squishiness going together like a drunk. As the Hercules type is characterizes it just as well, I think. So we have that situation where the total power, which for a time you can describe it sort of negatively, by saying whatever you can get away with. But then I think that's when you're in the so-called post-legitimacy stage. And you're still thinking of it. There was this thing called legitimacy, and it had to do with people, how much substance there was in the decision. Was it correct? Were they following the rules of law? Were the justices corrupt, or were they doing it by the legal scientific standard? Legitimacy. But if we're in the post-legitimacy stage, we're still pining away for legitimacy. But then the full sort of how did they say that? Alpha Bung? The full Alpha Bung moment. Maybe it's not just an Alpha Bung moment, so maybe it's a Ragnus moment. But yeah, Zizek doesn't like so much to say Alpha Bung that much anymore because he's partially always operating as an intellectual, which is to say someone who wants to be interesting in some way, who's read a lot and wants to be interesting. And then he thinks, we've overused the word Alpha Bung. We've in certain quarters, the Antigone has been overplayed. Maybe we should study something else and get another metaphor on ancient justice or law in the ancient context. And then people want to be original, but at the same time you want to signal that you know the discourse and etc. So there's all these problems. And then Zizek is saying right now, since Trump is now becoming the barbarian. So this Kafkian figure, who could be Vance, is I think Vance is more suited to this role of Joseph K. But we see in that figure also this parallax view of Zizek, so there could be a double Spaltung Ereignis. There could be this sort of split eventing, and for Zizek this is the barbaric king coming into power. Burn what you've worshipped, worship what you've burned in somehow, some kind of inversion. Some kind of monstrous shape, maybe like odious monstrous shape, Trump, according to Zizek. And then he says, now at the same time, Merz and Rutte are putting together this moment for Alpha Bung, or for sublation of the European thing. So let's get the example of sublation, by the way, is in Hegel's time, or a little before the 18th century, there was the emancipation of the serfs. So it's like serfdom was destroyed, and then out of the ashes, I mean, this is long before I don't know if it's Schumpeter or whoever to talk about the creative destruction, but before this they talked about that serfdom was destroyed, and then out of that the new order, the enlightened, the enlightened order, and this is a form of so-called sublation or Alpha Bung or whatever. So in a likewise way, it could be that the destruction of the um, order of legitimacy, smashing it apart, bringing in the records, could yield up something better. But we should think here, isn't it that we can actually, there's a pilot at this moment, isn't that one can actually intervene in the very moment of that, although it shows itself with little enough fuss, but nonetheless is actually the moment with super piloting is sort of available, so that you no longer have, as in the I think it's in the Brecht, where he says the not sure, but in any case, and whoever says the ship's captain is no longer telling us anything about our course, and the only thing they mention to the ship's pilot is something about what's on the menu today. We have a moment where there could be exegetical power or hermeneutical power could come into the steerage. So that's a very serious moment.